we're going to continue talking about shapes of bacteria. In the end of the last video, we're looking at, just the basic bacterial prokaryotic cell, and then how they can have different shapes and grow in different patterns based on how they, colonize and all that kind of stuff. And so now we're just going to look at some notes about that. So bacteria are prokaryotes, and I'm going to write that. You have to know this word. Okay, have to know this word. Two main divisions of living things. If you were to take all of life and put them under two divisions, it would be based on do they have a nucleus or do they not have a nucleus? And prokaryotes don't have a nucleus around their DNA. Okay, so in every single one of our body cells, we have a nucleus protecting our DNA. Prokaryotes do not. So their DNA is loose in the cytoplasm. So it's loose out, just like we saw right here. It's loose in the cytoplasm. No matter what shape it is, every single one of these would have just DNA somehow just loose in the cytoplasm of that cell, okay? And pro means before. So this word literally means before, and karyon means kernel or nucleus. So it's before the nucleus. These started arguing, adapting, reproducing, and growing. They started living before the nucleus developed around their DNA. So they just have stayed that way. So basically, they're made of a cell membrane, cell wall for protection, DNA, ribosomes to make their protein. And let's see, what have I left off? Cell membrane, cell wall, DNA, ribosomes, and cytoplasm. That's it. That's like it. That's all that's to them. Bacteria don't have organelles. In the next section, we talk about eukaryotic cells instead of prokaryotic cells. We're going to talk about all the organelles, and we've been talking about those all year. The nucleus is the organelle that protects the DNA. The mitochondria. I did not make that line almost long enough. The mitochondria is the organelle that makes our ATP through cellular respiration. You need to know all that stuff. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, go back and look at it in our notes. So they don't have all that complicated stuff. They just make some proteins, and then they have some instructions, and they have a very short lifespan. So they don't need all that stuff. We have some cells in our bodies that last our entire lifetime. These have an average of like 12 hours, maybe 24 hours, something like that. They don't need all that stuff. Most bacteria are heterotrophs. Another word you need to make sure you know. We talked about heterotrophs and autotrophs when we talked about photosynthesis. Hetero means different. Troph is talking about nutrients. So these are things that do not make their own food. When we talked about photosynthesis, we said photosynthetic organisms are autotrophs. Instead of saying who goes through photosynthesis and saying plants, we said autotrophs go through photosynthesis. So heterotrophs is that other. You are a heterotroph because you do not make your own food. Heterotroph is something that has to go get their food from somewhere other than themselves. And so since bacteria, don't have legs and arms and mouths and all that kind of stuff that you have, they either have to live in or very close to their food source. Okay, so the bacteria that live in your large intestine, and they break down, like E. coli. I talked about E. coli in the last video. The bacteria E. coli lives in your large intestine, breaks down food, helps us to absorb more of that nutrients. They're not doing it because they're trying to be nice. They're doing it because that's their food too. Okay, so their waste can be our nutrients or whatever, but it kind of sounds weird, but that's how we get a lot of our vitamins and stuff, is waste from bacteria taking the nutrients from our food that we couldn't break down, and then they do. So they either live directly in the food source, or they live extremely close to that so that they can be exposed to that food source sometimes. But most bacteria don't make their own food. Some do, they're autotrophic, but most do not. And then again, from that picture, some have flagella, and or cilia, which can be called pili or apillis. And then they can be also multiflagellates. So multi is many, and flagellate means many flagella. So they could have two and be biflagellates, or they could have a bunch. And so if you saw, something, you don't have to draw this, but if you saw, like a bacterial cell, and then they had like all these, like all over the place, then that's, multiflagellate. Okay, but like I said, you don't have to draw that. So they have these for movement. This is so that they can swim or they can move around. And then others that are just like diplococci. This causes pneumonia. I remember that because you have two lungs and these are two. Others that don't have cilia or flagella, or they're not spirally shaped or whatever, they just rely on us to move them around. They just move around, or they just live their whole life out right there where they were created. If it's like streptococcus right there in your throat, just created right there, and they live their whole life there. So they don't even move around. Okay. And then the last thing that on this little snippet of stuff, this is also just kind of the same stuff from up there. It's just a different picture, but you can see the flagellates down here. So the last little thing I want you to know is that bacteria have thousands, probably more than that, millions of, I say niche or niche. Niche or niche is the job of an organism. They have thousands of different jobs. They are everywhere. They're all over your desk. They're all over your pencils, the markers, the floor, all the doorknobs, everything. They're absolutely everywhere. And sometimes they have to be there. The ones in your body. If you take too many antibiotics, these get killed by antibiotics. We'll talk about that here in a second. You take too many of those and you kill off too much of your bacteria because they're killing off bacteria, that's going to cause you big major problems. You have to have them. They have jobs that keep you alive. They have jobs all over the world in every single biome. I don't care if we're talking about the tundra, where it is nothing but ice and snow, or if we're talking about the rainforest, where it has more life than all of the other biomes combined. They're everywhere, and they have all types of jobs. Okay, and so we're going to talk about how they grow, how they go from being just one little bacteria that you can't see into a colony that you can see growing on a petri dish or whatever, or the bacteria that's supposed to be there, and then suddenly their population is way too big. So bacteria have a very short lifespan. Average is like 12. What do you think? Days, minutes, whatever. It's 12 hours. From birth to death or whatever. So the average is 12 hours, and really where their lifespan starts over again is when they split. They reproduce and they split in half. So we'll look at that probably on the next video. But bacteria have a very, very short lifespan. About 12 hours is the average. So they have to reproduce very quickly. Think about us as humans. We don't even become able to reproduce another human or to produce another human until we hit puberty. Our bodies don't even do that. So let's say you hit puberty at 12. Well, then you shouldn't have a new human. You shouldn't, become pregnant or a parent at 12. So we typically are 20 years old before we ever reproduce, and then it takes 10 months. It takes 40 weeks for us to actually grow a new human to be where we say, okay, this person is born. So Bacteria, 12 hours. 12 hours after the beginning of life. The average is 12 hours before they split in half, and now there's 2 bacteria. Okay? So because bacterial growth is so fast, we have to keep their growth regulated. Like we have to find ways, and we have to have natural ways to keep them regulated. So that's what this page is about. That's why I say see the page on top of this, okay? So why don't we just go and talk about that? So how do we control bacterial growth? Well, one way, and the major way that we do with medicine is antibiotics. Anti or anti means against or not. Bio means life. So antibiotics are medicines that we take that are against living things. They could be against, they could be an antifungal or something like that, but just antibiotics is just a general for bacterial growth. Okay? But again, we depend on bacteria. Don't overtake antibiotics. Don't overtake them. Every single time you feel bad does not mean you need antibiotics. If you have a viral infection, don't take antibiotics. You're killing off some of the stuff that might be trying to fight off those viruses. So these are good if you take them in a regulated way and you don't take them way too often. Okay, but the natural way and the way that we rely is our immune system. I did not make these very big. So our immune system is our first line of defense when we have, an overpopulation of bacteria. Then our white blood cells need to, they have the army. I call it the army there because once they see, oh, this is kind of getting out of hand, they take care of that. But we kind of mess up our immune system sometimes. So antibiotics is one of the ways. So sometimes when we start to feel bad, and our immune system makes us feel bad, it cranks up our fever. Fevers make you want to lay in bed and do nothing. Well, guess why? Because that's exactly what your body needs you to do. So when you have fever and you feel bad, you need to lay down and you need to rest so that your body can fight off whatever it's trying to fight off without you adding to it. We immediately, some of us are kind of bad about immediately taking Tylenol or something to bring down our fever. We don't need to do that. We need to allow our immune system to get that fever. Basically the reason you do that is because when the bacteria grew out of hand, we're going to look at the different types of growth. When they grew out of hand, you were at 98.6 degrees, let's say. And so your body's first line of defense is to say, well, if you liked it at 98.6 and you grew out of hand, let's crank it up to like 99 and see if you die off. And then if you don't, we're going to crank it up to like 101. You are safe until your body reaches 102. And then you start to denature those proteins, which we talked about back in protein synthesis. So go back and look at that if you want to understand kind of more what I'm talking about. But until 102, you're fine. You need to let your immune system do what it's doing. We also misuse antibiotics. I bet if I was able to look at you right now and I said, raise your hand if you have antibiotics bottles in your medicine cabinet or somewhere in your house that have some that you didn't use. And I bet almost everybody in here would raise your hand and I would raise my hand too, because what we do is we get those antibiotics because we're sick. And then we take them, and when we start feeling better, we forget to take them. And so then we're like, oh, well, I'm fine now, and I'll put those away. We need to take those fully. Usually it says like 10 days or something like that. Take them fully so that we kill off the bacteria to a safe spot, and we don't misuse those. So between doing all that, we kind of mess up our immune system. But anyway, it is there. It's our white blood cells. It's our first line of defense trying to keep us safe. And then disinfectants. We touch stuff. I'm touching all these markers. Y'all touch all the markers, and the glue and the doorknobs and all that kind of stuff. And then we go when we eat, and if you're eating right now or whatever, then you might not have just washed your hands. Sometimes we do wash our hands, but we don't wash them very well, or we touch stuff after we've used the soap, and we don't pay any attention that, hey, we touched something that's unclean, and then our hands were clean, and so you're contaminating your hands before you actually do whatever you were going to do when you washed your hands in the first place. So if soaps are used correctly and cleaners and chemicals, these can help to disinfect, to kill back, like on the desk or on pens or on your hands or whatever, bacteria that are growing out of control. And then sterilization. Let's see, I need another color. Sterilization is using heat when we wash dishes. Let's say that's like a big one, and wash our hands and stuff. We need to use as much heat as you can without hurting, your skin. But heat kills bacteria, that at least the ones that live around us, because they're used to our body temperatures. They need our body temperature. So if you get much hotter, it kills them. So, dishwashers, they get hot, and that's because they're trying to sterilize. And then food preparation. And I don't know if I have another color. So I'm just going to say food prep. So we need to understand how to properly store and cook food, because we typically eat, we're eating living things, and bacteria live everywhere. And so we need to properly store food, and then we need to properly cook food so that we kill back bacteria that does not need to be in our upper digestive systems, okay? So these are some of the ways that we can handle bacterial growth. So we're going to look at these two different types of patterns of bacterial growth. I should have talked about those first, but it'll be okay. If you want to rewind and watch that again, I'm sure you all do, after we talk about this, then you are free to do that. So there's two patterns of bacterial growth that you need to understand. And this is not just, I said bacterial growth, this is just two patterns of growth. We're going to look at this again when we talk about population growth in ecology, and how it works. It doesn't matter what type of population you're talking about, whether it be bacteria or humans. These need to, this is the one we need to have. So this is the logical growth. It's called logistic growth. So I call it the logical growth, logistic. It's the logical growth. It makes sense. It keeps populations under control. The population is healthy, and I put that in quotes because what I mean by that is all of the stuff that they need, all of their resources are not being overused. Like resources, think about, what do things need to be alive? They need food. Okay, they need shelter, whatever it is, water, etc., whatever it is that they need, depending on the species that you're talking about. But every resource that a specific species needs, a logistic growth, it keeps them under a healthy population. So before I go down here, we're going to draw this on a chart, and I want you to use the same color here as you're using here so that your brain will connect the two. We're going to talk about what is a carrying capacity, okay? Let's see. I'm going to use a lime green because I'm not using that on anything else. But a carrying capacity, I wrote the definition for that up here. So highlight that in the same color. Carrying capacity is the number of a population that an environment can support. Okay, it's the maximum number, and I'm just going to put this in parentheses because this is not I couldn't fit it at the bottom whenever I needed to define that for you. So if you're talking about, how many people can fit into, what's the carrying capacity of this classroom? Well, you have to tell me what species you're talking about. So if you're talking about people, I'd say the carrying capacity of my classroom is like, comfortably for learning is like 20 people. I would say that, for standing room only, probably 200 people. So it's a very different carrying capacity. If I said, what's the carrying capacity for elephants in this classroom? Not very many. So bacteria, what's the carrying capacity in this classroom? I don't know, several billion probably, because there's just, so much stuff in this classroom. So, and so many people can fit in here. So the carrying capacity depends on what population are you talking about. So we're going to look at logistical or logistic growth. So logistic growth, anytime you're looking at a chart, and I need you to know how to look at a chart, time will be on the x-axis. Just remember, like Timex watch. So time is on the x-axis. So a population should have a time of really, really rapid growth. Like it doesn't take long, doesn't take much time to get from nothing to here. Okay, it doesn't take much time. And so this is actually the other type of growth. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so this is actually called exponential. It's growing exponentially. But you have a time of exponential growth, and then it should hover around that carrying capacity. You might go a little bit over it, but you stay at this healthy level of population, okay? So the population grows and you're using resources and all that kind of stuff. So, and then, but the environment can support this much, and so it should hover somewhere around that, okay? That's logistic growth. Everything stays healthy. The population doesn't overuse the food, doesn't overuse the shelter or any of that kind of stuff. The second type of growth, and this bacteria can really, really do this if they don't have any of this stuff happening, okay? This right here is what prevents this type of growth. This is exponential growth. And I did not make that big enough. Okay. So exponential growth is growth without any sign of slowing down. So like, I would love for my bank account to grow exponentially, okay? That doesn't happen, but it'd be great. That's kind of the only thing that I can think of that's great for growing exponentially, because exponential growth for living things, I don't care what kind of living thing we're talking about, something super, super tiny like bacteria, or it does not matter, even like grass or something. Every living thing has necessities, things that it has to have for that living thing to stay, successful and healthy. And if a population is just grows exponentially without any sign of slowing down, and just basically we're just saying, hey, this is going to just keep on going, they're going to run out of resources. Right here, let's say we're talking about a plant. Right here was the amount of the population of that plant that this yard could handle based on sunlight and nutrients in the soil and all that kind of stuff. And that plant just like kept reproducing and kept reproducing. Well, it's going to deprive the soil of nutrients. It's going to like block out sunlight as they fight over sunlight and stuff like that. So exponential growth for living things is not good. But like you said, this is an exponential time of you see the same thing. It's an exponential growth period of logistic, but it needs to have a time when it hovers around that carrying capacity. So these are the ways that we prevent bacteria from just doing this. Okay, we need fever, we need our immune system, we need antibiotics, we need sterilization, proper food prep, and all that kind of stuff to keep bacteria from just exponentially growing. Okay, so I thought there were going to be 2 videos. There will be a third and final video about finishing microbiology.